Tonight, we're not here to fix anything, not to understand everything, not to become someone better before you're allowed to rest. This is a quiet space where we gently let go and return to inner peace through soft Zen stories inspired by the Buddha, shared slowly so your mind can soften and your body can rest. Maybe today asked a little too much from you. Too many thoughts, too many worries, too many small things you tried to hold together. And maybe, just for this moment, you're ready to set them down. Here, you don't need to improve yourself. You don't need to solve tomorrow. You are already enough simply by being here, breathing quietly. Just for a moment. Where are you listening from tonight? Wherever you are, I'm grateful you're here, sharing this quiet space. Let your breath slow as if it remembers the way home. Let your shoulders soften like they no longer need to carry the world. Tonight, we'll listen to a simple story. A story from ordinary life, carrying a small thread of Zen and Buddhist wisdom. Not to give you more to think about, but to help you loosen your grip. Because suffering rarely ends by force. It softens when we stop holding it so tightly. There's nothing to rush, nothing to achieve, only a gentle drifting into rest, into stillness. Whether you stay awake or slowly fall asleep, this moment is already enough. And now, we begin tonight's journey with these Zen stories. Strength is often imagined as resistance, as standing firm, as pushing back. But there is another kind of strength that doesn't look impressive at first glance. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't raise its voice. It just keeps growing. That evening, the walk home was slower than usual. The street was quiet, lined with small houses and trees that had seen better days. Porch lights were already on, casting soft circles onto the sidewalk. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once and then went silent again. The path cut through a narrow strip of grass between the sidewalk and the curb. It had been stepped on all day. By people rushing to cars, by delivery workers, by kids cutting corners. The blades were bent, flattened, pressed close to the soil. It would have been easy to miss. The irritation from earlier in the day hadn't gone anywhere. A customer's tone, a comment that carried more edge than necessary. The kind of interaction that leaves a residue long after it's over. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just disrespect dressed as normal conversation. Anger rose in the familiar way. Tight shoulders, faster steps. The mind replaying what should have been said instead. I should have pushed back. I shouldn't let people talk to me like that. Why do I always swallow it? The anger felt justified, necessary even, like proof of self-respect. A foot stepped off the sidewalk and onto the grass without thinking. The ground was soft from recent rain. The blades folded under the weight, easily offering no resistance at all. That felt irritating too. The mind noticed the parallel immediately and didn't like it. Being flexible gets mistaken for being weak. Yielding gets confused with losing. Not reacting gets labeled as failure. The anger leaned into that story. You let them walk all over you. The foot lifted again. Another step. More grass pressed down. And then something small happened. A breeze moved through the street, barely noticeable, enough to stir the leaves in the trees, enough to ripple through the grass. The blades that had been flattened didn't spring back instantly. They took their time, slowly, quietly. But they did rise, not all the way, not perfectly, but enough to stand again. That image stayed. The walk continued. The irritation didn't disappear, but it softened at the edges. It became possible to feel what was underneath it. Embarrassment. The wish to be treated with care. The old fear that being calm means being overlooked. Anger often stands in front of those feelings. It makes itself large so the softer parts don't have to be seen. A car passed, headlights sweeping briefly across the grass. For a second, the bent blades caught the light bright against the darker soil. Then, the light moved on. The grass didn't chase it. There was a memory of another time years ago when anger had been expressed loudly, when words had been sharp and precise, when the response had been immediate silence. It had felt like winning for about 5 minutes. Later, there had been distance, awkwardness, a relationship that never quite returned to its earlier ease. The anger from today wanted a similar release. A sharp message. A pointed comment next time. A line drawn in permanent ink. But the image of the grass lingered. Grass doesn't grow by fighting the foot. It grows by staying rooted, by bending when needed, by using pressure as information, not instruction. That didn't mean letting harm continue. It didn't mean accepting disrespect. It just meant recognizing that immediate retaliation isn't the only form of strength. The walk slowed even more. The steps became deliberate. The breath matched the pace. The irritation loosened enough to notice something else: fatigue. Not just physical, but emotional. The tiredness that comes from bracing all the time. Anger requires effort. It keeps the system alert, ready to defend. Yielding when chosen consciously can be restful. Another step onto the grass, another bend, another slow return. The thought came quietly. What if I don't have to harden to survive this? It wasn't a conclusion, just a question. The house came into view. The porch light was already on. The door was still closed. The day wasn't resolved. The interaction hadn't been addressed. Nothing had been fixed. But the body felt different than it had an hour ago. Less braced, less sharp. The grass behind lay slightly flattened, already beginning its slow return. Not defeated, just alive. The next day didn't arrive with clarity. It arrived with routine. Morning light came in through the window at an angle that made dust visible. Coffee brewed. Shoes were tied. The body moved through familiar motions while the mind stayed half a step behind. The memory of yesterday's interaction was still there, but it felt different now. Less sharp, less demanding. Like something that could be looked at without flinching. Later, it happened again. Not the same person, not the same words, just a similar tone, slightly dismissive, slightly rushed. The kind of tone that suggests your presence is an inconvenience. The familiar surge rose up. This time it was noticed earlier, before the shoulders tightened, before the jaw set. The body remembered the grass. There was a moment small, almost invisible, where a choice appeared. Not between fighting and surrendering, but between reacting and responding. The words came out calmly, not soft, not apologetic, just clear, short, measured. Nothing dramatic happened. The other person paused, adjusted, moved on. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a subtle shift in the air, like pressure changing slightly. That surprised the anger. It had expected a battle or a collapse. Instead, there was neither. Later, walking again, the path passed the same strip of grass. More footprints now, more bending, more quiet recovery. It became clearer then that being like grass didn't mean allowing harm. It meant staying rooted while adapting. It meant choosing flexibility without losing direction. Anger often insists that strength must be loud to be real. But loud strength burns quickly. It needs constant fuel. The strength of the grass doesn't exhaust itself proving anything. There was relief in that realization, a subtle one. The kind that doesn't announce itself but stays. The irritation from the day didn't need to be carried home. It didn't need to be rehearsed or sharpened. It could be set down. That night, the body felt less braced. Sleep came without replay. The grass outside continued its quiet work, not because it was weak, but because it knew how to live. The spill happened fast. One small bump of the elbow, a light clink against the table, and then the sound water rushing where it wasn't meant to go. It wasn't a lot of water, just a bowl half full tipped over on the kitchen counter. It spread quickly, slipping toward the edge, dripping onto the floor in thin lines. The reaction came just as quickly. A sharp inhale, a flash of irritation, a sentence already forming in the mind. Of course, this happens now. Not because of the water, because of everything else layered underneath it. The day had already been long, a disagreement earlier that hadn't really ended, a conversation that stopped too soon, a feeling that something important had been mishandled, left open. The spill became the symbol. Paper towels were grabbed. Water was wiped up fast, almost aggressively. The bowl was set back upright, empty now, innocent again. But the anger didn't go with the water. It stayed tight in the chest, looking for somewhere else to land. The mind jumped backward in time, to the argument, to the words that should have been said, to the apology that hadn't come. The bowl on the counter faded from importance, replaced by the image of that unfinished moment. Anger has a way of convincing us that if we replay the past hard enough, it will eventually change. The counter was wiped again, even though it was already dry. The towel moved back and forth faster than necessary. A thought surfaced loud and familiar. Why do I keep thinking about this? Another followed right after. Because it wasn't fair. That felt true. The unfairness sat heavy. It demanded attention. The bowl was moved to the sink. Water was turned on. The sound filled the space, steady and grounding. The hands moved under the stream, rinsing the bowl. There was nothing wrong with it. No crack, no damage, just empty. That's when the comparison arrived. Spilled water doesn't go back into the bowl, no matter how much you want it to, no matter how unfair the spill felt. The water is already gone. Standing there, hands wet, the mind resisted the idea immediately. This isn't the same thing. The argument wasn't water. The hurt wasn't accidental. Someone else had been involved. And yet, the feeling was similar. The wishing things had gone differently. The urge to rewind. The quiet insistence that if the moment could just be replayed, everything would settle. The water kept running. The bowl stayed empty. There was a memory of being told long ago, "Don't cry over spilled milk." It had always sounded dismissive, like a way to shut down real disappointment. But maybe it wasn't about dismissing the loss. Maybe it was about noticing where the attention was being placed. The water on the counter had been wiped up quickly, efficiently, without drama. Because there was something else to do: move forward, clean up, continue the evening. The emotional spill hadn't been treated the same way. It had been stared at, replayed, argued with internally. The mind had been kneeling on the floor, mourning a bowl that could never be refilled. The faucet was turned off. The bowl was set on the drying rack upside down. Empty bowls don't mean failure. They mean space. That thought didn't land comfortably. Space can feel like absence before it feels like possibility. The body leaned against the counter. A breath went out slower than expected. The argument returned again, softer this time. Not the words, but the feeling. The tightness. The disappointment. The sense of being misunderstood. It became clear that none of that would change by standing here replaying it. The water wouldn't return. The moment wouldn't rewrite itself. What could change was where attention went next. The towel was hung to dry. The floor was already clean. The bowl would be used again tomorrow. Nothing dramatic had been lost, but something had been learned quietly. Holding on to what spilled keeps your hands wet and your mind stuck. Letting it go doesn't mean pretending it didn't matter. It means accepting that it already happened. The bowl sat there, simple and empty, waiting to be filled again. Later that evening, the house settled into its quieter rhythm. The lights were dimmed. The sounds softened. The bowl sat where it had been left, clean, dry, turned upside down on the rack. It was still empty. That shouldn't have mattered. And yet the mind kept returning to it as if something unfinished were waiting there. The argument came back too. Not as sharply as before, but persistent. The mind offered new versions this time. Slightly kinder words, slightly clearer explanations, a moment where everything landed the way it was supposed to. If I had said it differently, if I had waited, if I had just one more chance. Regret has a quiet voice, but it's relentless. It doesn't shout. It whispers the same sentence over and over until it sounds like truth. The body sat on the couch, but the mind stayed in the past, kneeling over that spilled moment, trying to scoop it back up with bare hands. There was a realization then, gentle but firm. Regret and care often get confused. Caring says, "This mattered." Regret says, "Stay here." One honors what was important. The other traps you in what can't be changed. The bowl hadn't been careless. It had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The spill hadn't meant anything about the future. It was just an event, a moment that passed. The argument was the same. It had happened. It had landed the way it landed. No amount of replay would make the water climb back into the bowl. That didn't mean the relationship was empty forever. It meant this particular moment was over. The kitchen was passed again on the way to get a blanket. The bowl caught the eye once more. It looked ordinary now, neutral, no longer charged with meaning. There was a thought, soft, almost practical: I can get another bowl. Not to replace what was lost, to continue. That was the difference. Letting go isn't the same as giving up. Giving up says, nothing else matters now. Letting go says, this moment is finished. Another one can begin. The mind resisted again briefly. But what if I'm letting them off too easily? That question carried the old tension. But letting go of spilled water doesn't excuse gravity. It just accepts it. Forgiveness doesn't mean denying harm. It means refusing to stay soaked by it. The blanket was pulled up. The body shifted, finding a more comfortable position. The breath slowed naturally, without instruction. The argument faded further into the background. Still present, but no longer demanding center stage. Tomorrow there could be a conversation, or there might not. Either way, it didn't need to be decided tonight. Tonight was about drying off. The bowl would be filled again, maybe with soup, maybe with cereal, maybe with something entirely different. It would serve its purpose again, because bowls are meant to be used, not mourned. The mind finally let go of the image of water spreading across the counter. The floor was dry. The towels were hung. The spill no longer existed anywhere except memory. And memory too can be set down, not erased. Just placed gently on a shelf where it doesn't need to be carried everywhere. The room grew quieter. The night moved forward. The bowl stayed empty for now, and that was okay. Forgiveness is often imagined as effort, as something you have to work toward, practice, repeat. Something that takes strength, discipline, and intention. Something you do. But sometimes forgiveness doesn't arrive that way at all. Sometimes it happens the way a flower drops a petal, quietly, without asking, without force. That afternoon, the window was open just enough to let air move through the room, not a strong breeze, just the kind that shifts papers, slightly lifts a corner of a curtain, then passes on. A plant sat on the table near the window. It had been there for a long time, not carefully chosen, just something that had survived moves, seasons, periods of neglect. One petal lay on the table beneath it, pale, soft, intact. It hadn't been torn off. It hadn't been pulled. It had simply reached the moment when holding on was no longer necessary. That image stayed longer than expected. Earlier that day, anger had been present, but faint, more like a residue than a flame. The sharp edges had dulled, but the memory was still there. A disappointment, a moment of hurt that had never really been resolved. Nothing dramatic had happened recently. No new conflict, no apology, no conversation to reopen the wound. And yet the feeling remained like a low hum in the background. The mind had tried to work on it before, tried to understand, to explain, to justify, to forgive properly. None of that had worked. Sitting there now, the petal drew attention without effort. It hadn't fallen because the plant gave up. It hadn't fallen because something went wrong. It had fallen because it was done being part of that stage of growth. Forgiveness doesn't always come from understanding. Sometimes it comes from timing. The room was still. The afternoon light softened the edges of everything. Dust floated slowly in the air. The memory returned again, but differently this time. Less sharp, less personal, like a story that had already been told enough times. There was a realization, quiet, almost surprising. The anger wasn't being held tightly anymore. Not because a decision had been made, but because the grip had loosened on its own. That felt unfamiliar. So much effort had gone into trying to forgive, trying to let go, trying to be the bigger person, trying to move on. But the petal hadn't tried. It had simply fallen when the connection no longer served a purpose. The body noticed the same thing happening internally. A soft release. Not all at once. Not dramatic. Just a sense that the weight wasn't being carried as deliberately as before. The anger hadn't been pushed away. It hadn't been argued with. It had just lost relevance. The thought arose gently, maybe forgiveness doesn't need to be heavy. That idea felt almost wrong, like cheating, like skipping steps. Forgiveness is supposed to be hard, isn't it? Supposed to require effort, courage, work. But maybe that belief had been part of the struggle. The petal remained on the table. No one rushed to remove it. It wasn't clutter. It wasn't mess. It was just there. The relationship in question felt similar now. Not fixed. Not perfect. Just present, no longer demanding resolution every time it came to mind. There was no urge to reach out. No urge to withdraw further either. The space between felt neutral. That neutrality felt like peace, not the bright kind, but the quiet kind that doesn't need confirmation. Forgiveness didn't announce itself. It didn't say, "Now you are free." It simply stopped asking for attention. The air shifted again. The curtain moved. Another petal trembled slightly on the plant still attached. It would fall later. Or it wouldn't. Either way, there was no rush. The mind returned to the rest of the day. Ordinary things, tasks, small decisions. None of them felt colored by the old anger. That absence was noticeable. Forgiveness hadn't arrived with certainty. It hadn't closed the book. It hadn't tied anything up neatly. It had arrived the way petals fall, naturally, without force, without needing permission, and for the first time that felt like enough. As evening moved closer, the light in the room changed. The sharp edges of the afternoon softened. Colors lost a bit of contrast. The plant by the window looked calmer, somehow less defined, more at ease with the dimming. The petal was still on the table. It hadn't been touched. No decision had been made about it. It didn't feel like something that needed to be cleaned up or put away. It belonged there for now. There was a subtle difference between letting go and forcing release. Forcing always comes with tension, with effort, with the quiet fear that if you don't keep pushing, something will snap back into place. Letting go when it's real doesn't feel like work. It feels like noticing your hand has already opened. The anger that once felt so present now appeared only occasionally, like a memory passing through. When it did, it didn't demand action. It didn't pull the body forward. It came paused and moved on. That was new. Before, forgiveness had felt like something to do. A process, a task, something that required the right mindset and the right timing. It had always carried a sense of obligation. But this felt different. Nothing had been forgiven on purpose. No statement had been made internally. No rule had been followed. The grip had simply loosened. The petal didn't fall because the plant decided to be generous. It fell because it was no longer needed where it had been. Holding on had stopped serving its role. Forgiveness can work the same way, not as a moral achievement, not as a declaration, but as a natural response when holding on no longer makes sense to the body or the mind. The memory that once carried heat now felt distant, like something seen through glass. Still visible, still real, but no longer sharp enough to cut. That didn't mean the past was erased. It meant the past had been placed where it belonged. There was no rush to feel complete, no urge to check whether forgiveness was finished or correct. Those questions didn't matter anymore. The relationship, whatever shape it now had, existed without pressure. It didn't need to be repaired tonight. It didn't need to be defined. Some things don't resolve. They soften. The room grew quieter as night settled in. The plant stood still. The petal remained where it had fallen. There was something comforting in the ordinariness of it all. Nothing sacred, nothing dramatic. Just a moment where nothing needed to be carried. Forgiveness, it turned out, didn't require effort when it was ready. And when it wasn't ready, no amount of effort could force it. It arrived when it arrived. Like a petal letting go of the stem when the season shifts. No resistance, no ceremony. Just gravity doing what it always does. The night continued. The room darkened further. The plant rested in the quiet, and the petals stayed there, soft, complete, and already part of the ground it would one day return to. Nothing more needed to happen. Nothing needed to be held. Everything was already allowed to rest. Anger doesn't always arrive as heat. Sometimes it shows up as pressure. A tightness you carry quietly long after the moment that caused it has passed. The bathroom light was the only one on in the apartment. Everything else stayed dark. The fan hummed overhead, steady and low, pooling steam toward the ceiling. The mirror was fogged just enough to blur the edges of a tired face without hiding it completely. Hands rested on the sink. The water ran warm, then hotter, then back again, as if the body was trying to find the right temperature for something that wasn't really about the water. It had been a long shift, the kind where irritation stacked up in small, forgettable ways. A sharp comment from someone who didn't mean it kindly. A decision that landed unfairly. A moment where speaking up would have taken too much energy, so silence was chosen instead. Silence can look calm from the outside. Inside, it often turns into something else. The jaw had been clenched for hours, shoulders slightly raised as if bracing against an invisible weight. The body knew it was carrying anger, even if the mind hadn't named it yet. Soap was pumped into one hand. The smell was familiar, clean, almost comforting. As the hands rubbed together, the skin felt rougher than expected. Dry, overworked. A small sting flared at a cut near the knuckle. That sting brought attention back into the body. There was a memory not from today, but from much earlier in life. An image of a sword seen once in a museum. Old, decorative, locked behind glass. The blade was dull, the metal dark with rust. What stood out wasn't how dangerous it looked, but how the rust had eaten into the scabbard itself. The plaque had explained that when a blade stays sheathed while still wet, corrosion begins from the inside out. The sword doesn't need to be swung to cause damage. Time and moisture are enough. The thought returned now, uninvited, but clear. Anger works like that. When it isn't expressed, when it isn't released, it doesn't just disappear. It stays close to the body, inside the chest, in the jaw, in the stomach. And before it ever touches the person it's aimed at, it starts wearing down the one holding it. The water was turned off. Silence filled the room except for the fan. A towel was reached for, pressed against the hands, then paused. There was no urge to explode, no fantasy of confrontation, just a low, steady irritation that had been humming all evening, draining energy in the background. Forgiveness hadn't crossed the mind yet. It still felt too abstract, too generous. What was clearer was something simpler. This feeling was exhausting, not because it was intense, but because it was constant. The mirror was wiped with the edge of the towel clearing a small circle. One eye looked back, then the other. The expression wasn't angry in any obvious way, just tired, guarded. The body had been holding on to something that no longer had a clear target. The sword image stayed. The rust spreading quietly, not dramatic, not loud, just persistent. The damage invisible until it wasn't. Anger likes to pretend it's power, but most of the time it's weight. The shoulders dropped a fraction, not on purpose, but because they had run out of reason to stay lifted. A breath moved through the chest, shallow at first, then a little deeper. No conclusion was reached. No moral decision made. Just an acknowledgement: keeping this inside is costing me. The towel was hung back on the rack. The fan clicked off. The bathroom light stayed on a moment longer, illuminating the quiet space. There was nothing to do right now. Nothing to fix, nothing to say, only the clear sense that whatever forgiveness might mean later, it would have to begin here, not with the other person, but with the body that had been carrying the blade all evening. And that body deserved better than rust. The bathroom light was turned off, but the hum of the fan lingered for a few seconds before fading completely. The apartment settled into its nighttime quiet. No music, no television. Just the low, distant sound of traffic outside and the soft creak of the floor as weight shifted from one foot to the other. There was no rush to do anything next. Anger often pushes for movement, a response, an action, some kind of release, but now movement felt unnecessary. The image of the rusted sword stayed close, not as a warning, but as a simple explanation. The blade hadn't been ruined by battle. It hadn't failed because it wasn't strong enough. It had worn itself down by being held in a state it was never meant to stay in. Wet, tight, closed. That felt uncomfortably familiar. All evening the body had been locked around something unsaid. Muscles tightened to keep it contained. Breath shortened to keep it from spilling out. It wasn't dramatic, but it was constant, like holding a fist closed for hours and calling it control. Forgiveness in that moment didn't look like generosity. It looked like loosening, not excusing what happened, not pretending it didn't matter, just stopping the body from continuing the punishment. A glass of water was poured in the kitchen. The sound was ordinary. The weight of the glass in the hand was grounding. The coolness against the palm drew attention back to something real and immediate. The first sip was small, automatic. The second was slower. With it came a realization that didn't feel philosophical at all. The person who caused the anger wasn't here. They weren't affected by this tension. They weren't paying any price for it. The body was. Shoulders still carried a faint ache. The jaw resisted, then softened. There was a quiet negotiation happening beneath thought, as if the nervous system was checking whether it was safe to stand down. Nothing bad happened when it did. The rusted sword didn't need polishing in that moment. It didn't need to be restored to something sharp or impressive. It just needed air, space, a chance to dry. Forgiveness maybe was that pause, that exposure, that willingness to stop sealing the blade back into the scabbard while it was still wet. There was no ceremony to it, no inner speech declaring release. Just a subtle shift from holding to allowing. The apartment felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because the body had. The same walls, the same dim light from the street, the same quiet ticking of the clock in the other room. But the pressure inside the chest had eased, not disappeared. Just loosened enough to breathe around. The mind tried briefly to pull the conversation back into focus, to review, to re-enter the argument. It didn't stick. There was nothing left to grip onto. The sword image faded, replaced by something simpler, hands opening. Anger hadn't been wrong. It had been information. A signal that something crossed a line. But keeping that signal active long after the moment passed was no longer useful. Signals are meant to be noticed, not lived in. A window was cracked open. Cool air moved in, brushing against the warmth of the room. The contrast was sharp at first, then calming. The body adjusted without comment. It felt clear in a way that didn't need explaining that forgiveness wasn't about the other person deserving peace. It was about the body needing it. The night continued on. Dishes left for later. Lights dimmed. The ordinary progression of things that didn't require vigilance. Anger, when it returned again someday, as it always would, might still arrive quietly. But now, there was a reference point. A memory of what it felt like to stop letting it corrode from the inside. To let the blade breathe. To let the scabbard rest. And in that small, practical release, something inside found its way back to a steadier ground. The car was parked, engine off, lights dimmed. The parking lot had thinned out, most people already gone home. A few streetlights buzzed overhead, casting pale circles on the asphalt. The dashboard clock glowed quietly, marking time without urgency. The person sat there longer than necessary. One hand rested on the steering wheel. The other reached up and unclipped the name badge, letting it fall into the cup holder with a soft plastic click. That sound felt louder than it should have, final. Like punctuation at the end of a sentence that hadn't gone the way it was supposed to. The meeting replayed again, not as a full scene, but as fragments. A phrase, a look, a pause that landed wrong. The kind of moment that leaves a bruise you can't point to, but feel every time you breathe a little deeper. Anger hadn't come first. Shock had. Then confusion. Then the slow burn of something unfair settling in. The mind wanted answers. Why did they say it like that? Did they mean it? Was it intentional or careless or something else entirely? Each question tightened the chest a bit more. Each replay drove the arrow deeper. The person leaned back in the seat, staring through the windshield at nothing in particular. A car passed on the street beyond the lot. Tires hissed briefly against pavement, then disappeared. There was a memory not personal, but familiar. A story heard many times, told in different ways. Someone is struck by an arrow, poisoned. Instead of pulling it out, they demand to know who fired it, where they came from, why they aimed, what kind of bow they used. Meanwhile, the poison keeps spreading. At the time, the story had sounded obvious, almost simplistic. Of course, you remove the arrow first. Of course, you save yourself before asking questions. But sitting there now, with the badge cooling against plastic and the body still tight, the story felt less theoretical. The arrow wasn't literal. It was the comment, the tone, the moment of being made small. And the poison wasn't coming from the other person anymore. It was coming from the hours spent replaying it, searching for intent, sharpening blame. The body didn't care who fired it. The body only knew it had been hurt. A breath came in shallow. Another followed a little deeper. The steering wheel creaked softly as fingers tightened, then loosened again. There was an urge to text someone, to vent, to name names, to get agreement that this was wrong, that it shouldn't have happened, that anger was justified. Justification can feel like relief, but it's a short-lived one. The phone stayed in the pocket. Instead, the person noticed the ache in the shoulders, the slight tremor in the hands, the dull pressure behind the eyes. These weren't signs of moral clarity. They were signs of stress. The arrow was still in. Forgiveness hadn't entered the picture yet. It felt too far away, too premature. What felt closer was something quieter, the need to stop the damage. The badge was picked up, turned over once, then placed back down. The name on it didn't feel relevant right now. Titles didn't either. All that mattered was the fact that something inside had been pierced, and ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. The mind tried again to trace the source, to build a case, to prepare for the next encounter. It offered strategies, lines to say, ways to regain control. None of them eased the body. The arrow story returned this time not as teaching, but as instruction. Don't ask who did this yet. Don't decide what it means yet. Just tend to the wound. The car seat supported the spine. The head rested back against it. The body, given even a small amount of permission, began to soften around the edges. Not relax fully, but enough to notice how much effort had been spent holding everything together. A long exhale left the lungs, unforced, heavy. The arrow hadn't been removed. Not yet. But for the first time since the meeting ended, the person stopped pushing it deeper with thought. The parking lot remained quiet. The streetlights hummed. Time continued on, indifferent and steady. And in that stillness, something important became clear. Healing doesn't begin with understanding the person who caused the pain. It begins with choosing not to keep poisoning yourself while you search for answers. The car door opened with a soft thud and then closed again. The sound echoed briefly in the empty parking lot before fading. The person stepped out, feet touching the ground as if testing it, then stood there for a moment without moving. The night air was cooler than expected. It brushed against warm skin, immediate and real. A reminder that the body was here now, not inside the meeting room anymore. Keys were turned in the hand metal, pressing into the palm. The sensation grounded things. Small, but enough. The arrow was still there, but the bleeding had slowed. Walking toward the building entrance, the person noticed how careful each step felt. Not dramatic, just deliberate. As if the body was quietly asking to be handled with a little more care than usual. Inside the hallway, lights were dim. The floor shone faintly, reflecting footsteps that sounded louder than they should have. The building was nearly empty. Whatever had happened earlier had already moved on without waiting. That realization landed gently. The world doesn't pause for our wounds. It keeps going, whether we've tended to them or not. The elevator ride was short. The doors opened and closed without ceremony. No one else inside. No mirrors demanding a look, just the low hum of movement upward. When the door opened again, the person stepped out and paused, hands still resting against the wall. There was no need to hurry. Forgiveness still wasn't the word that fit. What fit was something quieter: triage. In emergency rooms, they don't start by asking who caused the injury. They stop the bleeding. They stabilize. They make sure the body survives long enough for answers to matter. This felt like that. Inside the apartment, shoes were left by the door. A jacket was hung up slowly, sleeves smoothed without thinking. The small rituals of arrival created a sense of boundary. Work stayed outside. The meeting stayed outside. The arrow came in, but not the whole story around it. A glass of water was poured and held with both hands. The coolness traveled up through the fingers into the arms. Another point of contact. Another reminder. Sitting down, the person noticed how much quieter the mind had become. Not empty, just less frantic. The questions were still there, but they weren't shouting anymore. Why did they say that? What did they mean? Should I address it later? Those could wait. Right now, the body needed to be unpoisoned. There was no technique involved, no special breathing pattern, just a willingness to stop interrogating the moment and start listening to the body instead. The shoulders were sore, the neck stiff, the chest tight but easing. Each sensation was allowed to exist without commentary. Pain, when met this way, changes. It becomes information instead of threat. The arrow, metaphorical as it was, didn't need to be yanked out violently. It needed steady attention, space, care, the kind that doesn't ask for explanations. Forgiveness began to make sense then, not as absolution, not as approval, but as a boundary. A boundary that said, I won't keep this inside me just to prove a point. The other person could keep their intention, whatever it was. The comment could keep its ambiguity. None of that needed to live in the body overnight. The room felt calmer, not because justice had been served, but because harm had stopped spreading. Later there would be choices, conversations, maybe even clarity, but those belonged to a different moment. For now, the arrow was no longer being pushed deeper. The poison was no longer circulating unchecked, and that was enough. The night continued on, steady and unremarkable. The body settled into the chair. The breath found a slower rhythm. Healing didn't feel dramatic. It felt practical. And in that practicality, something important had shifted. Peace didn't wait for answers. It arrived the moment the wound was treated first. It was late enough that the kitchen felt like a place between days. The overhead light was off. Only the small lamp near the counter was on, casting a soft, uneven glow across the island. A glass sat half full of water. Ice clinked once as it settled, then went quiet. Somewhere in the building, a dishwasher hummed distant and steady. The person stood at the counter reading a message they had already read too many times. It wasn't long. It wasn't even especially cruel. Just a sentence with a tone that caught. A line that nudged exactly where it hurt. A comment that felt unnecessary and because of that, impossible to ignore. The body reacted before the mind finished interpreting it. A quick heat in the chest, a tightening behind the ribs. The tongue pressed lightly against the back of the teeth as if already forming words. There's a specific kind of anger that shows up like this. Not explosive. More like irritation with a hook in it. The message sat there on the screen, small and contained, but it pulled. It invited a response, Not a calm one, a sharp one. Something that would put things back in balance. Something that would sting just enough. The person set the phone down on the counter, face up. The screen dimmed, but the words stayed bright in the mind. Water was poured into the glass until it reached the rim. A few drops spilled over, sliding down the side, and pooling briefly on the counter before being wiped away with the edge of a sleeve. The action was automatic grounding. The first sip was taken quickly. The second was slower. The irritation didn't leave. It lingered like something caught just inside the mouth. Not painful exactly, but impossible to forget. The urge to bite down on it, to clamp, to pull back hard. There was a memory sudden and clear of fishing as a kid. Not the quiet, patient kind, the messy kind. Hooks scattered in a metal box, fingers nicked more than once. The shock of realizing too late that a hook had gone deeper when pulled the wrong way. The worst part wasn't the initial catch. It was the instinct to yank. Hooks work because they count on that instinct. The message on the phone felt like that now. A small barb, carefully placed, waiting for movement. The person leaned their hip against the counter and stared at the walleyes, unfocused. The mind started assembling replies anyway. One version calm and firm, another sarcastic, another cutting. Each one felt satisfying in the imagination. Each one also tightened the chest a little more. The body knew this pattern, knew what came after. The brief rush of hitting send, the hollow feeling afterward, the replaying, the wondering if it went too far or not far enough. The hook doesn't disappear after you bite. It digs in. The phone buzzed again. Not a new message, just a notification from somewhere else. The sound was enough to make the jaw clench. That was when it became clear the hook wasn't just in the conversation. It was in the body now. Anger like this doesn't need much fuel. It feeds on attention, on repetition, on the simple act of chewing the same thought again and again. The person placed a hand flat on the counter. Cool surface, solid, real. The other hand wrapped loosely around the glass. The ice had melted slightly. The water tasted plain. There was a quiet recognition, not dramatic, not virtuous. I'm already hurt. Swallowing another sharp word wouldn't fix that. It would only add another thing to pull out later. The message on the phone stayed unanswered, not ignored. Just left where it was, the way you might leave a splinter alone for a moment instead of digging at it with dirty fingers. The irritation shifted. It didn't go away, but it changed shape. Less sharp, more like an ache. The person thought about how often arguments grow this way. One barb leads to another. One hook swallowed invites a second. Before long, both sides are bleeding and calling it honesty. The kitchen stayed quiet. The lamp hummed faintly. The night pressed gently against the windows. Nothing had been resolved. But something important had been noticed. When you've already bitten the hook, the next kind move isn't to swallow more bait. It's to stop pulling. The kitchen didn't change while the decision settled. The lamp stayed on. The glass of water stayed where it was. The phone remained face up on the counter, silent now. like it had said its piece and stepped back to watch what would happen next. There was a strange pause that followed. Not relief, not clarity, just a moment where nothing was being added. That was new. Usually this was the point where another thought would arrive sharper than the last. Another sentence would form, demanding expression. Silence often felt like losing ground, like letting the hook do its work. But standing there, hands resting on the counter, it became clear that the real damage didn't come from the first barb. It came from the tugging. The body noticed small things. The way the tongue rested in the mouth, the slight ache in the jaw from being clenched earlier, the shoulders still raised just enough to signal tension. All of it felt like evidence of something already caught. The instinct was to pull, to answer, to restore balance by making the other person feel what you felt. That instinct is fast, almost automatic. But hooks don't come out clean when you panic. Anyone who's ever had one embedded knows this. Pulling straight back only drives it deeper. The pain spikes, the damage spreads. What could have been a careful removal becomes a wound that takes longer to heal. The person reached for the phone, then stopped. Not out of willpower, but out of a sudden understanding. Sending another message right now would be exactly that pull. Instead, the phone was turned face down. Gently. No drama. Just a small adjustment in direction. The irritation flared briefly in response, like a muscle protesting when you stop using it the way it's privique. Then it softened, unsure where to go without a target. A breath came in slow and shallow. Another followed, deeper, more settled. The chest loosened a little. Not all at once. Just enough. Silence, it turned out, wasn't passive. It was an action. Not the kind that proves anything. The kind that prevents further harm. Forgiveness started to feel less like a decision about the other person and more like a boundary around pain. A refusal to keep feeding something that was already hurting. The message hadn't disappeared. It still existed. The words were still there, but they no longer had teeth. The hook, once noticed, lost some of its power. The person took another sip of water. The glass was nearly empty now. The sound it made as it was set down was dull, final, a small closing. There would be a later moment to respond if needed. A moment when the body wasn't reacting. A moment when words could come from steadiness instead of sting, or maybe there wouldn't be a response at all. Not every hook needs to be addressed. Some only need to be removed quietly. The dishwasher hummed on. A car passed outside. Life continued in its ordinary way, unaffected by the unsent reply. The irritation continued to fade, not into forgiveness exactly, but into space. Space where the body didn't have to stay alert. Space where the mind didn't need to sharpen itself. What remained was a clear sense of this swallowing. One more barb wouldn't make the pain smaller. It would only make it harder to heal. The night moved forward. The kitchen stayed dim and calm. The phone stayed silent. And somewhere between the counter and the quiet, the hook loosened simply because it was no longer being pulled. The bathroom was quiet except for the sound of water. Not rushing, not splashing, Just a steady stream hitting tile, breaking into softer echoes that filled the small space. Steam gathered slowly, blurring the edges of everything without fully hiding it. The person stood under the shower, eyes closed, letting the warmth do what it always did. Loosen muscles that had been tight all day, soften joints that had been held too stiff for too long. That's when the anger showed up. Not loudly, not all at once. It came as a tightness in the chest, a thought that slipped in sideways, a memory of a conversation that had already ended but hadn't stopped moving inside. Someone's words, someone's tone, a look that landed wrong. It didn't seem like much on the surface, the kind of moment that other people might shrug off without thinking twice. But the body had reacted strongly, almost disproportionately. That was the part that didn't make sense. The water ran over the shoulders, down the back. A hand reached out to steady against the wall. The tile felt solid, cool under wet skin. The mind replayed the moment again, slower this time. Why did that bother me so much? The question wasn't asked gently at first. It carried an edge, an accusation, as if the anger itself were a problem to be solved. The body answered instead, a familiar tightness in the stomach, a subtle clench in the jaw, a shallow breath that didn't quite make it all the way down. This wasn't new. The realization came quietly without drama. This reaction had happened before. Different people, different situations, same sharp spike, same lingering heat. The water kept falling, patient and indifferent. The steam thickened, fogging the mirror just outside the shower door. Shapes softened, reflections blurred. A memory surfaced, uninvited but clear. Standing in front of a mirror years ago, younger, trying to understand a feeling that didn't match the situation. Seeing the same tension in the face then, the same guarded expression, the same sense of being braced against something unseen. The mirror doesn't create what it shows. It only reflects what's already there. The anger from earlier began to feel less like an attack from the outside and more like a flare from somewhere inside. Not invented, but triggered. The water pressure shifted slightly, a different note in the sound. The body adjusted without thought. The person rested their forehead briefly against the tile wall. The heat felt grounding. The contact steady. It wasn't that the other person hadn't been careless or insensitive or wrong. They might have been. But the intensity of this reaction didn't belong entirely to them. It belonged to a place that had been touched, a place that hadn't healed yet. The mind resisted that idea at first. It wanted the anger to stay justified, clean, directed outward, easier that way. But the body didn't argue. It recognized the pattern. Anger in moments like this wasn't just a defense. It was a signal. Something inside had been reflected back too clearly. The mirror in the bathroom was now fully fogged. Only vague outlines remained. The person reached out and wiped a small circle with the palm of their hand. An eye stared back, then another. The face didn't look furious. It looked exposed. The water continued to fall steady and warm. The room held the sound without judgment. Forgiveness hadn't appeared yet. It didn't need to. What had appeared was understanding not of the other person, but of the self. A recognition that some reactions are echoes. Old vibrations stirred up by new contact. The anger softened slightly, losing its sharp edges. It didn't disappear, but it became less urgent, less demanding. The mirror showed what it always does, not who caused the pain, but where it lives. The water kept running, and for the first time since the moment earlier that day, the person stopped arguing with the reflection. The water was turned off slowly, not all at once. The sudden quiet felt louder than expected. Droplets slid down skin, then fell to the floor in soft, irregular taps. Steam lingered in the air, holding the warmth a little longer before letting it go. The person stayed there, still inside the fog. There was no rush to step out. No need to dry off yet. The moment felt unfinished, but not in a tense way. More like something was settling into place. The anger from earlier hadn't vanished. It hovered nearby, quieter now, less sharp. Without the noise of the water, it was easier to hear what it was actually saying. It wasn't shouting anymore. It was pointing. The mirror still fogged, except for the small cleared circle reflected a softened version of the face. Lines less defined, edges blurred. The eyes looked tired, but calmer. The person wiped the mirror again, widening the clear space. More of the face came into focus. The expression wasn't accusing. It wasn't defensive. It looked like recognition. That comment earlier in the day, the one that had landed so hard, wasn't unique. It hadn't invented the pain. It had only pressed on something that was already sensitive. A place that had learned long ago to brace. The body remembered before the mind did. Moments of being dismissed, overlooked, spoken to in ways that felt small. Moments when reacting strongly hadn't been safe, so the reaction had learned to hide. Anger had become the guard at the door. It made sense now why it showed up so fast. Why it arrived with heat and certainty. It wasn't trying to start a fight. It was trying to protect something fragile. Understanding that changed the shape of it. The anger no longer felt like an enemy to suppress or justify. It felt like a messenger that had been misdirected for years. Forgiveness seen from here wasn't about the other person at all. It was about turning toward the place that had been reflected. The towel was reached for, wrapped around the shoulders. The fabric was rough and familiar grounding. The body felt heavier now, more present. Standing in front of the mirror, the person didn't analyze their face, didn't critique it, didn't search for flaws. They just looked. The reflection didn't need correcting. It needed acknowledgement. The person who had triggered the anger earlier was probably moving on with their day by now. Their words already dissolving into other conversations, other concerns. They weren't carrying this moment anymore. But the body had been. And that was where forgiveness belonged. Not as a pardon, not as an excuse, as a release of the expectation that someone else should heal what they didn't break. The mirror showed a small nod, barely perceptible. A quiet agreement between the body and the reflection. I see you. I know why that hurt. The steam began to thin. The room cooled gradually. The outlines sharpened again. The anger continued to fade, not into indifference, but into something more workable, less explosive, more honest. The mirror returned to being just a mirror. The person stepped away, feet touching the bath mat, feeling the texture beneath them. Another ordinary sensation anchoring the moment. There would be other triggers, other reflections, other times when old wounds caught the light at the wrong angle. But now, there was a pause where there used to be a reaction, a moment to recognize what was being shown. The towel was hung up, the light dimmed, the bathroom returned to quiet, and somewhere between the fog and the clearing, the person learned this: not every anger is about the person in front of you. Sometimes it's about what they accidentally helped you see. And when that's the case, forgiveness starts at the mirror. The porch was quiet in a way that felt earned, not silent exactly. There was the soft movement of air through the trees, the occasional sound of a car passing a few blocks away, tires hissing briefly against pavement before fading. A porch light cast a warm circle that didn't reach very far, leaving the edges of the night untouched. The person sat on the steps, elbows resting loosely on their knees. A thin blanket was folded beside them, unused. The air was cool but not uncomfortable. Earlier that day, words had been thrown their way, not shouted, not dramatic, just spoken casually, almost carelessly. Opinions, judgments, a few sentences that landed heavier than they were meant to. The kind of words people release and then forget about, assuming they'll dissolve on their own. They hadn't dissolved. They had followed the person home, settled somewhere behind the ribs, tightened the chest in small, quiet ways, returned during moments of stillness like now. The mind replayed them automatically. Why would they say that? What gives them the right? Do they really think that's who I am? Each replay sharpened the edge a little more. The night sky stretched overhead, dark and wide. Clouds moved slowly across it, their shapes changing as they went. They weren't dramatic clouds. No storm. Just thick enough to block stars, thin enough to keep moving. The person watched them without trying to. There was a familiar urge to answer the words from earlier, to correct the record, to defend, to explain, to make sure the version of them that lived in someone else's mind wasn't distorted. That urge carried heat. Anger in this form didn't feel explosive. It felt solid, like a weight pressing down. The porch step beneath them felt firm, unmoving. The wood held its shape without complaint. The contrast stood out. The clouds above shifted constantly. The step stayed where it was. A thought drifted in, uninvited and simple. I don't have to move for this. The words from earlier were still there, still sharp in memory, still unpleasant, but they were beginning to feel less like something that needed engagement and more like something passing through. Clouds don't ask mountains to respond. They don't insult them. They don't define them. They just pass. The person adjusted their position slightly, finding a more comfortable angle on the step. The movement was small, practical. The body responded with a slight easing. Earlier anger had pushed them to stand up inside, to brace, to prepare for argument, to gather evidence, to rehearse explanations that might never be used. Sitting here now, none of that felt necessary. The mountain doesn't chase clouds away. It doesn't argue with their shapes. It doesn't try to prove its solidity. It remains. The words from earlier began to feel lighter. Not gone, just less dense. They still existed, but they no longer pressed so hard against the chest. The person noticed their breath for the first time in a while. It moved steadily, not deep, not shallow, just present. The clouds continued their slow crossing. One thinned out its edges, dissolving into the dark. Another drifted in behind it, briefly taking its place. The words in the mind did something similar. One replay faded. Another appeared, then softened. Nothing was being forced away. Nothing was being held. The porch light hummed faintly. A moth circled it once, then disappeared into the night. The world carried on without commentary. Forgiveness hadn't arrived yet. It didn't need to. What had arrived was space. Space between the person and the words. Space where the body didn't need to tense. Space where identity wasn't up for debate. The mountain doesn't absorb the clouds. It doesn't become them. It lets them pass overhead, knowing they'll change shape and move on, whether it reacts or not. The person stayed seated, watching the sky shift, feeling the steadiness beneath them. And for the first time since the words were spoken, it felt possible not to carry them any further tonight. The night grew a little deeper while the person sat there. Not darker in a dramatic way, just quieter. The street sounds thinned out. The air cooled another degree, enough to notice on the skin, but not enough to be uncomfortable. The porch light stayed steady, unchanged by the shift. The clouds kept moving. Some thickened briefly, gathering into heavier shapes, then stretched thin again, as if pulled apart by an invisible hand. None of them stayed long enough to become anything fixed. The words from earlier followed the same pattern now. One surfaced, paused, then drifted on. They no longer arrived as a solid block. They came in fragments, losing their weight as they passed through attention. The sting that had felt so sharp before softened into something dull, then into something almost neutral. The person realized how much effort had gone into holding those words in place, replaying them, interpreting them, arguing with them silently. That effort had felt necessary, like vigilance, like self-respect. But sitting here, it was clear that vigilance wasn't the same as stability. The porch step didn't strain to stay solid. It didn't tense against the night air. It didn't react when clouds blocked the stars. It simply stayed. The body took that in. The shoulders dropped a little more. The chest felt less compressed. The breath moved without obstruction, as if it had been waiting for permission. Forgiveness, when it finally appeared, didn't come with emotion. No warmth, no reconciliation, no sense of moral victory. It came as a practical understanding. The words don't need a home in me. They could exist somewhere else, in the air, in memory, in someone else's mind, but they didn't need to live in the body. The mountain doesn't store clouds. It doesn't cling to them. It doesn't follow them once they pass. The person leaned back slightly, letting their weight settle into the step. The wood creaked softly, adjusting, then held. There would be other days like this. Other comments, other judgments, other moments when someone else's words would drift too close and brush against something sensitive. That didn't need denying. But tonight had made something clear: reacting wasn't the only way to protect oneself. Standing still was an option too. The mind tested this new understanding briefly, offering one last replay of the words just to see if they still hurt. They didn't land the same way. They arrived thin, faded faster, left less behind. Not because they were suddenly true or false, but because they no longer had a surface to stick to. The clouds continued on, opening small patches of sky where stars briefly showed through. One by one, faint points of light appeared, then vanished again as another cloud passed. Nothing stayed fixed. Nothing needed correction. The person stood up slowly, brushing their hands against their legs to warm them. The movement felt unhurried, complete. The anger that had been there earlier wasn't gone. It had simply lost its anchor. Without the words to grip it, had nowhere to settle. Inside the house, waited. Warm. Ordinary. Safe. Before stepping back through the door, the person looked up once more at the sky. Another cloud slid past, already changing shape, already moving on. The mountain never chased it. And tonight, neither did they. The porch light was turned off. Darkness folded in gently. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Outside, the clouds kept drifting. Inside, something stayed. Anger can feel like energy, like clarity, like you finally have the courage to say what you should have said. And sometimes it really is that. But there's another kind of anger that doesn't bring anything clean with it. It just brings heat. It doesn't solve the problem. It keeps the problem alive because it keeps feeding it. He was sitting in his car, in the driveway, engine off, seatbelt already unclicked, hands still on the steering wheel, like he hadn't fully arrived home yet. The house was dark, except for a faint glow through the blinds. The neighborhood was quiet in that late-hour way. No lawn sprinklers, no kids, no garage doors, just the occasional far-off sound of tires passing over a main road. The phone was in the cup holder. The screen was lit. A thread of messages sat open, and his thumb hovered over the keyboard. He had typed something sharp, deleted it, typed something longer, explaining everything. Deleted that too, then typed something short again. Too short, the kind of short that's really a slap. He wasn't proud of any of it. But he also didn't feel calm. Calm wasn't available. What he felt was that tight, bright pressure behind the eyes, like a light turned up too high in his head. It had started as something small earlier in the day. A comment, a tone, a little joke that wasn't funny. The kind of moment you can brush off in public, then later, when you're alone, it replays with different lighting. In the replay, you notice the disrespect more clearly. You notice the pattern. You notice how long you've been swallowing things. By the time he got in the car after work, the anger had already grown. Not because the original moment got worse, but because he kept returning to it. Each return brought a fresh surge, like throwing another log onto the same fire. Now in the driveway, he could feel his body wanting motion. His knee bounced once. His shoulders were forward. His jaw was tight. He stared at the words he'd typed. They felt satisfying in a dark way, like hitting a wall with your fist. Painful, but honest. Immediate. He was about to send it. Then, the strangest thing happened. Not an insight, not a spiritual moment. Just a tiny, ordinary detail that interrupted the whole machine in his head. The porch light clicked on across the street. A neighbor stepped outside for a second barefoot, holding a small bag of trash. The light turned their face into a pale blur for a moment, then they disappeared back inside. The porch light stayed on. That was it. Nothing important. But the pause it created in him was real. Like the mind had tripped over something neutral and for a second stopped sprinting. He looked at his phone again and saw something he hadn't wanted to see. This message wasn't going to fix anything. It wasn't even going to express what he really felt. It was only going to spread the fire into tomorrow. Because anger, when it's hot, doesn't just want to speak. It wants to land. It wants to hurt back. It wants the other person to feel what you felt. And the problem is, once you send that kind of message, you can't take it back. Even if you apologize later, even if you explain later, the heat stays in the room. His thumb hovered again. He felt his chest tighten like his body was arguing. Send it. They need to know. They deserve it. And maybe part of that was true. Maybe the other person had been careless. Maybe they had been unfair. Maybe they had been repeating the same pattern for years. But there was another truth, too quieter and less dramatic. He didn't want to spend his night like this. He didn't want to give his attention to the same flame over and over, just to keep it alive. He had once watched a video about wildfires, how wind feeds them, how dry brush becomes fuel, how one gust can turn a contained fire into something that eats miles. He remembered one line from a firefighter interview, something simple. You don't fight a wildfire by giving it more oxygen. He wasn't dealing with a forest. He was dealing with a message thread. But his body felt the same. The same heat. The same spreading. He set the phone down in the cup holder and forced himself to do one thing that wasn't about the conversation. He looked around the car like he'd never been in it before. The dashboard dust. The little stack of receipts in the console. The faint smell of coffee that had spilled weeks ago and never fully left. The silence that existed, whether he was angry or not. For a full 10 seconds, he did nothing. In that small pause, the anger didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It stopped being a command. It became a feeling. Still unpleasant, still real, but no longer in charge. He picked the phone up again. The message was still there waiting. He didn't delete it yet. He just stared at it and asked himself one plain question. If I send this, does my life get calmer, or does it get louder? The answer came fast. He didn't want louder, so he didn't send it. Not because the other person was right, not because he was above it, but because tonight he could feel the cost. He could feel how attention was feeding the fire and how he was the one holding the match. He placed the phone face down again, like closing a lid. Then he finally took his hands off the steering wheel and let them rest in his lap. The porch light across the street was still on, a small, steady glow. It didn't ask anything from him. It didn't demand a response. It just existed quiet and constant while the rest of the neighborhood slept. He sat there a moment longer, letting that steadiness be contagious. He stayed in the car longer than he needed to, not because he was frozen, but because he could feel how close he still was to doing something he'd regret. The anger hadn't left. It had just stopped shouting. Now it sat in his chest like a hot coal, quiet, but very much alive. He knew this feeling. The part where you don't explode, but you don't feel better either. The part where restraint starts to feel like pressure. Like holding a door shut while something keeps pushing from the other side. He opened the car door and stepped out into the night. The air was cooler than inside the car, and that helped. He locked the door, the soft click sounding louder than it should have in the quiet. The house stood there, familiar and dark, waiting. Inside, he didn't turn on the overhead lights, just the small lamp by the couch. The room felt still, like it was holding its breath. He set his keys down and noticed his hands were slightly shaky. Not dramatically, just enough to be honest. He sat on the edge of the couch and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The phone was still in his pocket, heavy. He could feel it even without touching it. The old habit would have been to distract himself. Turn on the TV, scroll, drown the feeling in noise until it dulled. But tonight, something in him wanted to do less, not more. He wanted the fire to burn down on its own without fresh fuel. Anger has a strange relationship with time. When you keep feeding it, it feels urgent, immediate. Like something has to be done right now. But when you stop feeding it, it reveals something else underneath. Often it's hurt, or disappointment, or the tired feeling of having the same boundary crossed again. He closed his eyes for a moment and let his breath drop lower. Not in a practiced way, just enough to notice that it could. Images floated up without being invited. Other moments with the same person, different days, different words, all small, none catastrophic. But together, they formed a pattern. And patterns are what turn irritation into anger. He saw something else too, and it wasn't flattering. He saw how much of his energy he'd been giving away by replaying the same story. How the other person had moved on hours ago while he was still sitting in the heat of it. That realization didn't make him kinder. It made him tired. He stood up and walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, drank it slowly. The cold helped. It anchored him in something physical, something real. The anger didn't disappear, but it lost some of its edge, like a blade set down instead of being swung. He thought again about the wildfire image. How fires don't only consume what they touch, they change the air. They make it hard to breathe even for people far away from the flames. He didn't want to live in that air. He picked up his phone and looked at the message again. It still bothered him. That hadn't changed. But now he could see it without the red haze around the edges. He could read it as one moment, not a verdict on his worth or a summary of the relationship. He deleted the unsent message, not as a gesture of forgiveness, just as a practical decision. Those words belonged to a version of him that was overheated. He didn't need to give them a future. He opened a new note instead and typed a few sentences that he didn't plan to send to anyone. They weren't polite, they weren't measured. They were honest in the rawest way. He wrote exactly what had hurt, exactly what he wished had been different. He didn't soften it. He didn't justify it either. He let it exist. When he was done, he put the phone down and didn't reread it. The words had done their job just by leaving his body. He noticed then how much space there was in the room, how the quiet wasn't empty but full of ordinary sounds, the fridge cycling on, the faint tick of a clock somewhere, his own breathing slower now. Forgiveness, he realized, didn't arrive as a feeling, at least not tonight. It arrived as a choice not to keep setting himself on fire to keep someone else warm. It arrived as the decision to stop feeding something that only grew when he paid it attention. Tomorrow he might say something, or he might not. He could address the issue later from a steadier place, or he could decide it wasn't worth reopening. Both options existed now, and having options felt better than being trapped in reaction. He turned off the lamp and stood in the dark for a moment. The anger was still there, faint but present. He didn't push it away. He just didn't invite it to take over the night. As he lay down, the image of the porch light across the street came back to him. Steady, unbothered, not fighting the dark, just illuminating its own small circle. That felt like enough. He let the night take the rest. Some grudges don't feel dramatic. They feel reasonable, like something you've earned the right to carry. They sit quietly in the background of your day, flavoring everything just a little. Conversations taste sharper. Silence tastes bitter. Nothing is unbearable, but nothing is clean either. That evening, she was at a laundromat a few blocks from home, the kind that stayed open late and smelled faintly of detergent and warm metal. Rows of machines thumped and turned in steady rhythm. A TV bolted to the wall played a muted game show no one was really watching. The fluorescent lights were bright but tired. She slid coins into a washer and pushed the door closed with her hip. The machine started with a low churn, water rushing in like it always did. She sat down on a hard plastic chair and set her bag at her feet. This wasn't where she planned to be tonight. But her apartment washer had broken again, and she didn't have the patience to deal with it. The day had already asked too much. Earlier, there had been a call. Short, familiar. A voice on the other end that knew exactly how to press the old buttons without raising its own volume. Nothing outright cruel, just dismissive enough. Enough to remind her of how often she'd been expected to understand, to bend to be the bigger person. She'd hung up politely, She always did. Now sitting there, the anger came back in waves. Not sharp, but salty. Like something she'd been sipping from all day without realizing how much it was dehydrating her. She leaned back and watched the washer spin. Clothes slapped gently against the drum, socks, shirts, a towel she'd owned for years. Ordinary things going around and around, over and over, until they came out clean. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't check it. She already knew who it would be. Or maybe not who, but what. Another message. Another attempt to smooth things over without actually changing anything. She crossed her arms and felt the familiar tightening in her chest. It wasn't just about tonight. It never was. It was about the accumulation. The way small hurts stacked up until they felt heavy. On the vending machine near the door, a plastic bottle of water reflected the harsh light. She stood, walked over, fed in a few coins, and twisted the cap off. The water was cold, almost painfully so. She took a long drink. It tasted off. Not bad exactly. Just wrong. She frowned and took another sip. Same thing. A faint bitterness she couldn't place. She looked at the bottle, then at her hand. There was salt on her fingers, left over from a soft pretzel she'd grabbed earlier without thinking. She'd wiped her hand on a napkin, but not enough. The salt had transferred to the bottle's mouth. She laughed quietly at herself. A small sound quickly swallowed by the machines. One pinch of salt didn't seem like much, but in a small bottle it changed everything. She rinsed the bottle cap at the sink and drank again. This time the water tasted clean, neutral, what it was supposed to be. She stood there a moment longer, letting that register, not as a lesson, not as advice, but as a simple fact. Some things only stay bitter because you keep them in a small container. She went back to her chair and watched the washer finish its cycle. The machine slowed, then stopped with a final dull thud. She moved her clothes to the dryer, poured in detergent, closed the door. Another rhythm began. Thump. Pause. Thump. The anger in her chest shifted. It didn't disappear, but it spread out. It felt less concentrated, less sharp. She thought about the call again, but this time without rehearsing what she should have said. She thought about it like it was just one drop in a much bigger body of water. Important, yes, but not the whole story of her life. Forgiveness didn't feel close. That word still felt like something she wasn't ready to touch. But something else felt possible, not carrying this one moment so tightly. She imagined holding the resentment like a small fistful of salt. Powerful in the palm, sharp on the tongue, useful in the right amount, but punishing when kept close. She didn't need to throw it away tonight. She didn't need to pretend it didn't exist. She just needed to stop drinking from it. The dryer hummed on. The TV flickered. Someone laughed softly on the other side of the room. Life continued unbothered by the tight story she'd been telling herself. She took another sip of water. Clean, simple. And for the first time that evening, her shoulders dropped without being told. She folded her clothes slowly, one piece at a time, as the dryer finished its last lazy turn. The warmth clung to the fabric, familiar and grounding. A shirt, a towel, a pair of socks that never quite stayed together. Ordinary things warm in her hands, asking for nothing more than to be put away. The laundromat had grown quieter. One machine stopped, another started. Somewhere near the doors, someone yawned without trying to hide it. The TV was still on, but no one was watching anymore. She stacked the folded clothes neatly in her basket and sat for a moment before standing. The anger was still there, but now it felt diluted, like it had been spread across a wider space instead of sitting heavy in one tight spot. On the drive home, she noticed how her thoughts kept trying to return to the call, the familiar pull. The urge to replay it, polish it, squeeze meaning out of every word. Each time it surfaced, she didn't push it away. She just let it widen the way water widens when it meets something larger. By the time she parked, the street was quiet. Porch lights glowed softly. A dog barked once, then settled. She carried the laundry inside and set it down without rushing to put everything away. In the kitchen, she poured herself another glass of water. This time she rinsed her hands first without thinking. The glass was clean. The water tasted like nothing at all. And that nothing felt like relief. She leaned against the counter and drank it slowly. Her body responded before her thoughts did. A small sigh. A release she hadn't planned. She thought again about the person on the other end of the phone call. Not with tenderness, not with blame either. Just with distance. Enough distance to see that whatever they carried, whatever they were repeating, didn't need to become her entire inner climate. It struck her then how often resentment behaves like a solution. How it promises protection, control, clarity. But what it really does when held too close is shrink the space you live in. Everything starts to taste the same. Sharp, overbearing, too much. She didn't need to forgive tonight. She didn't need to call anyone back or write a careful message. She just needed to notice the size of the container she was holding this feeling in. She imagined the resentment again as salt. In a small glass, it ruined the water. But poured into a lake, it disappeared. Not because it was denied, but because it wasn't concentrated anymore. Her life was bigger than this moment, bigger than this call, bigger than the pattern she was tired of. That thought didn't feel dramatic. It felt practical. She carried the basket to the bedroom and set it at the foot of the bed. Instead of folding everything right away, she lay back for a moment, still dressed lights low. The ceiling fan turned slowly above her, slicing the air into gentle pieces. Her phone rested on the nightstand. It stayed quiet. She didn't check for messages. She didn't brace for them either. She let the space exist as it was, unanswered, open. Forgiveness, she realized, didn't always arrive as a feeling towards someone else. Sometimes it arrived as restraint toward yourself, as the choice not to keep pouring bitterness into a small cup and calling it strength. She turned onto her side and listened to the soft mechanical rhythm of the fan. Her breath matched it without effort. The anger hadn't vanished, but it no longer dominated the room. It was just one element among many, like salt in the air near the ocean. Present but not overwhelming. Tomorrow she might speak up, or she might set a boundary, or she might decide that some conversations didn't deserve the same energy anymore. All of those options were still available. Tonight she didn't need to solve it. She closed her eyes and let the quiet do its work. The water inside her felt clean again. Some thoughts don't need answers. They need permission to fall. That afternoon, the person was walking through a small park near home. Not a destination walk, just a loop around familiar paths, the kind taken without expectation. The air carried the quiet chill of late autumn, cool, but not sharp. Leaves had gathered everywhere along the edges of the path, beneath benches around the bases of trees. The person walked slowly, hands in pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the breeze. The day had been full of thinking, not urgent thinking, persistent thinking. The kind that circles without landing. Did I handle that right? What if I misunderstood something? Why does this keep coming back? Each thought felt light on its own, but together they weighed down the mind, like holding too many small things at once. A leaf skittered across the path, pushed by a brief gust of wind. It spun once, then settled near the curb. The person noticed it without stopping, without assigning meaning. Just a leaf moving where the air carried it. The thoughts continued anyway. Overthinking often comes from holding on longer than necessary, replaying moments that have already passed, carrying conversations that are no longer happening. The mind keeps them close, as if holding them will prevent loss. The person slowed near a cluster of trees and stopped beside a bench. The bench was empty, its wooden slats dusted with fallen leaves in shades of brown and gold. Some were curled and dry, others still held a trace of color. The person brushed a few leaves aside and sat down. The bench creaked softly under the shift of weight. The mind tried to follow its usual rhythm, bringing the same thoughts forward again. But something about the stillness made the repetition feel more obvious, like watching the same scene loop without progress. The person leaned forward slightly and picked up a leaf resting near their shoe. It was fragile now, edges thin and brittle. When turned over, the veins were clearly visible, branching outward from the center. This leaf had once been green. It had once been part of something alive and growing. Now, it had let go. Not in a dramatic way, not as a decision, just as a natural response to time. The person rolled the leaf gently between two fingers. It crumbled a little, leaving faint dust behind. No resistance, no effort. There was a quiet contrast between that and the mind's behavior. The mind wanted to keep everything intact, preserve every detail, maintain the exact shape of thoughts long after their purpose had passed, as if letting go meant something important would be lost forever. The person released the leaf and watched it fall back onto the bench, joining the others. It didn't stand out. It didn't disappear. It simply returned to where it belonged. The wind moved through the trees again. More leaves loosened and drifted down, landing without sound. The ground didn't try to catch them. The branches didn't hold them back. The person leaned back against the bench and let the shoulders drop. A breath came and went without direction. The thoughts still appeared, but they didn't feel as solid. One thought surfaced clearly: maybe I don't need to carry this right now. It wasn't a conclusion, just a possibility. The person watched another leaf fall, this one slower, turning gently as it descended. It didn't rush. It didn't hesitate. It moved as it was meant to. Overthinking often adds urgency where none exists. It convinces the mind that now is the only moment to solve, to decide to fix. But the park offered a different pace. Everything here moved according to its own timing. The person sat there longer than planned, watching leaves gather where they would, unbothered by order or arrangement. The ground accepted them without question. A few thoughts tried to cling, unfinished ideas, imagined futures, but they felt less convincing here, less worthy of being held so tightly. The person stood up slowly and brushed the bench clean again, though there was no real need. The leaves returned almost immediately, drifting back as the wind shifted. That small futility was oddly comforting. You can clear space, but you don't have to control what falls. The person stepped back onto the path and continued walking. Leaves crunched softly underfoot, breaking apart with each step. They didn't protest. They didn't linger. The mind noticed this too. Some thoughts are meant to fall away on their own. Not pushed, not solved, just allowed to return to the ground. And as the person walked on, that idea stayed not as something to remember, but as something already happening. The path curved gently ahead, disappearing behind a line of trees. The person followed it without thinking much about where it led. Shoes moved through dry leaves, each step producing a soft, uneven sound. Some leaves cracked, others folded quietly into the ground. The mind noticed the sound, then let it go. A little farther along, the path widened into a small clearing. Sunlight filtered through the branches in thin lines, catching dust in the air. Leaves lay everywhere on the ground, on the low stone wall nearby, gathered in shallow piles where the wind had paused. The person stopped again, resting a hand on the cool stone. The surface felt steady, unconcerned with what landed on it. Overthinking often feels like an attempt to keep things from falling apart. The mind holds onto ideas, memories, plans, worried that if they're released, something essential will be lost. But here, nothing seemed to be missing. The trees weren't bare because they had failed. They were bare because it was time. The person watched as another leaf detached and drifted down, slow and uneven. It didn't fall straight. It wandered, changed direction, then finally settled near the base of the tree. No effort, no resistance. The mind offered a thought. What if I just let this pass? It wasn't a command. It didn't ask for discipline. It was closer to curiosity than intention. Some worries returned lightly. A moment from earlier in the week, a question that hadn't been answered yet. They appeared, hovered, then faded like leaves brushing past without landing. The person noticed how different this felt from trying to push thoughts away. Nothing was being rejected. Nothing was being solved. The thoughts were simply no longer being held. A breeze moved through the clearing, lifting several leaves at once. They skidded across the ground, then dropped again. The wind didn't choose which ones to move. It didn't aim. It just passed through. The person realized how often the mind behaves differently, selecting certain thoughts, gripping them tightly, replaying them until they feel heavier than they are. As if attention alone could make them permanent, but attention can also be released. The person sat down on the low stone wall and let the feet rest on the ground. The body felt settled now, not because everything was resolved, but because nothing was being carried unnecessarily. The mind grew quieter in the background, not empty, just less crowded. Thoughts still passed through, but they didn't demand a response. They didn't line up to be examined. There was a subtle relief in that. Not relief from answers, relief from effort. The clearing remained unchanged. Leaves continued to fall one by one without announcement. The ground accepted them without comment. The person stood up again and brushed a few leaves from their jacket. Some fell back immediately. Others clung for a second longer before dropping. That felt familiar too. Some thoughts fall right away. Others take a little time. Neither needs to be forced. As the person walked toward the edge of the park, the sounds of the neighborhood returned. Cars in the distance, a door closing somewhere, a faint voice carried by the air. Ordinary life waited just beyond the trees. The person didn't feel lighter in a dramatic way. There was no sense of breakthrough, just a quiet reduction in pressure, less holding, less arranging. The worries from earlier would probably come back later, in different forms, on different days. That was part of being human. But now, there was an understanding that didn't need to be remembered actively. Thoughts don't need to be cleared for peace to appear. They only need to stop being collected. Leaves don't fall because the tree forces them to. They fall because the season changes. The person stepped out of the park and onto the sidewalk carrying nothing extra, letting the rest return to the ground behind them. And that was enough. Some worries don't come from what we see. They come from how unclear the seeing has become. Late that night, the person stood in a small bathroom, the kind with soft yellow light and a mirror that had seen better days. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the ventilation fan. The sink held a few water spots. The mirror showed thin streaks where steam had dried unevenly. The person leaned closer, noticing their own reflection looked slightly dull. Not distorted, just muted. Like something was between the eyes and the image. It had been one of those days where the mind kept questioning itself. Not loudly, just persistently. Did I misread that situation? Why do I feel unsure about something so small? What if I'm not seeing this clearly? The person reached for a hand towel hanging nearby and wiped a small section of the mirror. The cloth moved easily, leaving behind a clearer patch. The reflection there looked sharper, more precise. The contrast was noticeable. The rest of the mirror still looked hazy, but that clean spot stood out. Nothing about the person had changed, only the surface in front of them. Overthinking often works this way. The mind assumes confusion means something is wrong with what it's looking at. It forgets to check the lens. The person wiped another section of the mirror, then another. Each pass revealed more detail. The face looked the same, but the image felt more trustworthy, less questionable. There was a quiet satisfaction in that. Not because the reflection was important, but because clarity didn't require effortful thinking. It required a simple action. The person paused, towel resting against the sink. The thoughts from earlier still lingered, but they felt less urgent now, less personal. Maybe nothing was wrong with the situation. Maybe the view had just been clouded. The mirror wasn't broken. It was dusty. The person turned on the faucet, briefly rinsing the towel. The sound of water filled the room, steady and grounding. As the towel was wrung out, droplets fell into the sink, each one landing and disappearing without leaving a trace. That felt familiar too. The person returned to the mirror, wiping the remaining areas, slowly, not rushing. The strokes were uneven, imperfect, but effective. The image sharpened bit by bit. Overthinking tends to pile up quietly. A doubt here, a second guess there. Each one settles like dust, barely noticeable at first. Over time, the surface becomes less clear and the mind assumes the blur is permanent. But dust isn't damage. The person stepped back and looked at the mirror again. It wasn't spotless. A few streaks remained. But it was clear enough. The reflection felt stable. The person studied their own eyes for a moment. Not critically, just observing. The face looked tired but familiar, real. The doubts from earlier returned briefly, testing the space. What if you're still missing something? The thought arrived, then softened. Even a clean mirror doesn't show everything at once. It shows what's in front of it. Nothing more. The person placed the towel back on the rack and turned off the light above the sink. The room dimmed slightly, shadows smoothing the edges of things. Clarity didn't mean certainty. It meant fewer distortions. The person leaned against the counter, letting the body rest. The mind felt quieter now. Not because the questions were answered, but because they no longer felt so close to the face. Distance helped. The mirror stood there, calm and neutral, ready to reflect whatever came next. It didn't judge. It didn't analyze. It simply showed what was there when it was allowed to be clean enough. And for now, that was sufficient. The bathroom felt quieter after the light was turned off. Only the small night light near the floor remained on, casting a soft glow across the tiles. The mirror reflected less now, but what it did show felt gentler, less exposed. The person stayed there for a moment, not checking their reflection again, just standing with hands resting on the counter. The surface was cool and solid, something real to lean on. The doubts from earlier in the day tried to return, but they came more slowly now. They didn't rush in all at once. They appeared one by one, like dust settling after the air has already begun to clear. What if I judged that wrong? What if I misunderstood someone's tone? What if I'm not as capable as I think? Each thought arrived, hovered, then passed without being pulled closer. The person noticed the difference. Earlier, these thoughts had felt right up against the face, demanding attention. Now they stayed at a distance. The mirror had helped with that, not by answering anything, but by changing how close the questions felt. Overthinking often presses the mind too close to the problem, so close that everything looks distorted. Small details feel huge. Uncertainty feels like failure. Stepping back doesn't remove the question. It restores proportion. The person turned slightly and caught a partial reflection in the mirror from the side. It wasn't sharp, but it was recognizable. Enough to know who was standing there. That seemed important. Clarity doesn't mean perfect visibility. It means not mistaking blur for truth. The person left the bathroom and walked down the hallway. The house was quiet now. Lights were low. The day had finally reached its end. In the bedroom, a lamp cast a warm circle onto the wall. The person sat on the edge of the bed and took off their shoes slowly, one at a time. Each movement felt unhurried. The mind continued to offer thoughts, but they felt thinner, less convincing, like reflections seen through glass rather than direct experience. The person remembered how earlier the mirror had looked dull, almost unreliable. Nothing about the person had changed during that time, only the layer in between. So many worries work like that. They don't reflect reality as it is. They reflect it through layers of doubt, fatigue, memory, and habit. The mind forgets that the surface can be cleaned. The person lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Shadows from the lamp softened the corners of the room. The body felt heavier now, not from tension, but from tiredness. A final thought drifted through quieter than the rest. Maybe I don't need to look so closely tonight. That thought didn't ask for agreement. It simply passed like a suggestion offered without pressure. The mirror in the bathroom would gather dust again. Steam would rise. Water spots would return. That was normal. Cleaning it once didn't mean it would stay clear forever. But knowing it could be cleaned changed something. The person closed their eyes, letting the day sit where it was. No need to recheck, no need to review. Some days require action. Some days require clarity. And some days only require not mistaking dust for damage. The room remained still. The thoughts grew softer, then fewer. And in that quiet, the mind rested, not because everything was resolved, but because the view no longer felt distorted. That was enough for tonight. Wherever you are tonight, I'm grateful you chose to spend this quiet time here. If these stories help you rest, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a gentle place to land. And now, you don't need to do anything more. Let the night hold what you can't carry. And if sleep comes, let it come.